So while we have spoken a lot about the other kinds of, all different kinds of science communication, we are going to slowly start shifting into the formal aspects of science communication. And throughout your career, whether you continue to be in academics or not, you will be making presentations. So we are not in academics anymore, or directly, and we have to still keep making presentations all the time. So making presentations and doing an effective presentation can be will be important for you, no matter whether you are a teacher, whether you are taking training classes, whether you are presenting an idea, whether you move to corporate and are selling a product. So making an effective presentation would be very important. But however, this one we will focus more on communicating your science, but the general principles are things that you should keep in mind for anything else as well. So this is another PhD comics. Like she said, you'll keep getting references. So how you usually plan it? They'll be like, introduce, and then it'll all be done. How it actually goes. That's the point. It's like, it is so real that it's funny. So why does this happen? Why does it end up having that, you end up actually having to do a 15-minute talk in probably 5 minutes or something? I mean, apart from the fact that you might end up having technical difficulties and you don't say things that you're supposed to say, you say too much of what you don't need to say, so like you saw today morning, like the first talk, you might end up having technical difficulties. So you should assume that there would be. And from taking those perspectives that things can go wrong, somebody in the audience might actually not be interested and might be sleeping off, or any of these things, you approach the entire presentation from that perspective. And how can you actually build up skills to enable you and help you to make these more effective presentations? So the main part which we have been already talking about is the audience, the importance of the audience. Because if you are in a room by yourself and you're talking, you'd probably be like, okay, aadmi pagal hai or ladki pagal hai. I mean, we do talk to ourselves, and that's a very normal thing. I think you should talk to yourself, that's fine. But you never would do a presentation for you never actually make up an entire thing just to talk to yourself, right? So if it's all for the audience, then why always have only you as the perspective when you're preparing? For us as well, we would not be standing here giving this presentation had it not been for you. If none of you turn up and decided, oh, I don't need this, we would not have this at all. So for every presentation, there's always an audience, and every audience is different. Even if you don't know the audience very well, we didn't know who you would be, all of you, but we still have to try and think about or do some amount of well, you can say research because we love the word research, some research onto the kind of people that would be attending. And sometimes remember that for running a talk like this, you will end up having a lot of technical people, people who give the audiovisual support and all. You actually have such people as well who get terribly bored of constantly talking technical terms. So in your talk, when you design and you practice and you actually develop, try to come up with a kind of body language that actually makes even them feel engaged. It'll not be there for the subject matter, but at least as a presentation that yes, you're all welcome to this talk. So what would you want from a talk? Think of yourself, like if you are attending, of course you are all attending, so what would you like from a talk? You've already answered some of these questions in the previous module about science communication, right? You would want the content to be clear, right? You would have something that conveys a new information, maybe that it poses some interesting question. Over the last 2 talks, we have actually given you some new questions, new topics to think about. Right, if it's the same rut, something that you already know, something that you've already seen, then it's not for you. Like you would not be interested in a talk like that, right? So when you are preparing a talk, you would give it to an audience. You have to think about these aspects. Why is the audience coming to your talk? What would they be expecting from you? Hopefully it will describe something important. Maybe there's a novel discovery. From a science perspective, maybe there'll be some new direction to the field. There should be clarity and organization of thought an idea. Want it to be understandable. Again, avoid jargon, because though it's actually very, it makes you look very, maybe, to your field, it makes you look very intelligent. Oh, this person knows this pathway so well, or knows this abbreviation. To many in the audience, it means nothing. I could say ABC, XYZ. I know WTDBT. It doesn't make you, it just makes you to some aspects in some places, it actually makes you look imbecile that you actually can't pronounce the entire word. So much better is to bring it down to language that actually makes sense to everyone. Simple and clear visual aids, not too cluttered, it should be well organized. And it also enables, that should not have too many, like if you're giving a 30-minute talk, it should not have 30-minute slide that, every slide has to go in 1 minute. Something happens, there's a technical difficulty and I will not be able to finish it. Never. You should always have sufficient space so that if there is something like, maybe there's a glitch, the current goes off, or you actually fall down, like, it happens. And you're like, oh shit. And there's enough time for you to actually get up and, dust yourself and like, continue the talk and still finish on time. And running overtime with your presentation is an extremely bad habit. I'm sure all of you have experienced very senior people who always overshoot time, and then the person coming next will have to hurry up and quickly finish because you can't tell them, come on. So instead, somebody junior doesn't get to present their work, right? These things happen, but those are not the mentorship lessons you should take. Just because they do it doesn't mean you should do it. You can always be better than them, right? Our generation can learn. And then, of course, the style and delivery. We already spoke about keeps me awake, varies with voice. Much of these points have already been covered. Conveys an enthusiasm, doesn't stay in one place. That usually happens only because, if I continuously keep standing here on one place, my body language starts to get a little dumb. Like it gets maybe a little authoritative that I'm just looking down on you. Sometimes not having a dais actually helps, which is what happens. Like there have been instances where we want to get down from the dais and walk around, and then trying to do that and we like skip the step and fall down. Such things happen. It'll happen to you, and it's like completely normal. These are, just build it into your style of talk that it's okay. I can assess this. Okay. And friendly and approachable. Hopefully, although you guys have not been asking us questions, hopefully we have been friendly and approachable, that you can ask us questions should you choose to. And of course, that when you attend a talk, you want to go to a talk where you find the speaker credible, that when they say something, you feel like, yes, this person knows what they're talking about. This person actually has confidence in the topic that they're talking about. Too many fumbled sentences will actually make the point not come across to the audience at all. So if these are the things that you want in a talk when you attend it, where you want to be kept awake throughout the talk, doesn't your audience deserve that? So much of these practices are, again, these are not overnight things. These are not something that you learn here and like, yes, I'll do this. They're something that you slowly build in, and everyone has their own style. Something that works for me will not work for you. Something that works for him will not work for her. There are things that you have to develop, and these are personal choices as well. So these are things that are evolved over a period of time. And remember, PowerPoint does not kill presentations. You can have a very, very boring PowerPoint slide, but you can have a very interesting speaker actually make it come alive. And the other way around as well. So a PowerPoint is just a tool. And it should just be used because if I'm not that good of I don't have that much of a stage presence. I'm not Nasruddin Shah that I can actually stand here and keep an entire audience captivated for an hour and a half. For people like us, we have these. But this is not the talk. If this was complete, this was sufficient, if a PowerPoint is everything, and I can just have this scroll down, why do you need me to talk? So you should learn how to use a PowerPoint to make an effective communication. This is to have some points across, some things that the audience can take back with them as well. So from these perspectives, plan your presentation. And again, the goal of your presentation is to keep your audience captured. Hopefully they'll pay attention to what you're saying. This doesn't have too much data, that is fine. But supposing you have data that they need to pay attention to, which you can go through and explain. And of course, it will hopefully be such that whatever your message is, that will actually come across sufficiently clearly and relevantly that it actually enables or encourages your audience to act upon it. So parts of a presentation, or when you set out to make, these are things that you'll have to think about. You have to plan the presentation. You have to know what know your target audience, where you're doing it. I'll get to that slowly. You will have to structure the presentation well. And there are skills of handling the audience. You're a very, very nice audience. You're hardly shooting difficult questions at me. You could make my life extremely miserable by saying, I don't agree with you, why you're asking these things. You could actually, or continuously keep stopping me through the presentation. You have audiences that continuously keep stopping presentations as well. So how do you handle such things? Supposing you are running over time and you need someone to actually, okay, I will answer the question eventually. So these are also arts or soft skills that you have to develop. And you have to develop. Because gone are the days where you can do something at the lab and write up a manuscript and send it off and everybody will know about you. It doesn't work like that. In your career, as digital media goes more and more, you'll probably have to make videos of your work. You'll probably have to sell yourself much harder as funding crunch increases. Or you might want to work on a very difficult or an isolated problem and you want to promote that. Maybe you want to turn your science into activism. How do you go ahead and do so? Being able to do elevator pitches and all will become very important. Being able to present your work at a controversial audience, to a controversial when you know very well maybe a competitor is sitting. How do you handle these things? So handling audience is a very, very important part of making a presentation. So you figure out the 5 whys of the presentation before you actually start preparing the slides. So what's your purpose? Why are you doing this? Is this where, is this a dissemination of knowledge? Is this that you're going to do this? Or you are actually presenting it to a funding agency? We'll give these examples. Or is it a mentoring session? Is it students? Is it school students? What's your purpose of doing this? Why are you doing this presentation? Who is your audience? So audience can be the same, but your purpose of it might be different. One might be just a departmental seminar, one might be a thesis defense. And then you have to decide upon what the content will be. So based on what's your purpose, who your audience is, you start thinking about the content. And then once you've decided the content, so I have these much things. I have worked on this project for 3 years. I have 23 gel pictures. And then you decide, what is the time constraint? But I have only 20 minutes. How much can I present? Or supposing, again, like I said, you might actually have 20 minutes. And you go to this conference and you're given the 10:15 slot. And the previous person has run over and it's already 10:15. There's going to be switch and all that. And you don't have enough time. Your time has actually come down from 15 to 20 minutes. So be aware of your time constraints. And of course, the space constraints. Not everywhere will you have a nice auditorium like this where the air condition is running. You might be giving it in a school where there's no audiovisual support. You might be giving it in a place where you do not have a presentation like you might have to do a chalk talk or something. So the kind of place where you'd be giving a talk is also kind of very important to analyze before you start putting your presentation together. These are things that you'll, as and when, the more talks you give, you will start encountering. Now usually you are aware, so whenever you go for a workshop or a conference, look up the venue beforehand. Look up whether it is a small auditorium like this or it's a big hall, banquet hall. Because the way you would interact with the audience would be different, where it's a huge hall which houses or sits 300 people versus a small auditorium where there are 80 people. How much individual interaction can you make? So your content of your presentation will also slowly change depending upon how much of the audience you're going to interact with. Are you going in a satellite session, or is your talk going to be among the plenary main talks? So let's come to structuring your presentation. You have to have the attention getter, right? Something that ropes in the audience and keeps them there. So you want to get the attention getter, like why? What is the need for the work that you're doing? quickly put in what your main message is. Now, so sort of a background, but make it into a very, very impactful one, like start from the why of the project. And then it's always good to give a preview of the upcoming slides. Now, can you tell me why it's good to give a preview of the we are not giving you a preview, but we're insisting that you give a preview. Sorry? Audience, exactly. Any other point? So you're giving a scientific talk, right? It's good to orient the audience to say that, yes, I've covered the background, I'm going to talk about the results next, and then will the conclusions come. So that the audience can actually, because it is a data, it's a set of data that you are very familiar with. You've been looking at it and looking at it and looking at it, and to you it is very obvious where the transition from the results to the discussion has started. But to the audience, much of the audience, it might not be very obvious. It's actually very good to kind of break down, stop and reiterate, like, my results have been this. Now let me get to the discussions or the points that I would like to talk. So it's kind of already good to lay out that I will be getting to this. Many a times you do not have the results separately and the discussion separately. You would be putting in the discussion points along with the results. So for those, again, it's always good to orient the audience saying I'll be discussing it together. Okay? Then you have the content slides. Now content slides is the one where scientists are the worst at. They feel that everything should be on the content slide. And we are harping on that the content slide should not be more than 3 to 5 slides, depending upon the number of slides that you have. It's always good to have within the slides itself the different sub-points that you want to talk about. So everything has aim, like you might have aim and sub-aims. You might have result with sub-results, one thing leading to the next. And try to group them into one slide, and I will go to it slowly as to how you can actually use, because you're using a PowerPoint presentation again as a technical assist. It's like an assistance, so that you know, okay, these are the points that I need to cover. But you don't need to have everything. You're doing a talk. So you can actually talk through these points so to ensure that everything or every point is not, and many times, this is a personal tip that I was taught by my PhD supervisor. It's actually good to leave out on content slides, because you know that the audience will ask you that question. I don't know if you've ever got this tip. If you have, with great minds think alike. If you haven't, then it's a good thing to think about. Leave out the content slide that you're sure there will be a question on, and that question comes and you're actually very ready to handle a question. But that should not compromise the content or compromise the flow of the data. It's not that you should leave out data, but within the data or within the content, if there are sub-points that you know will irk the questions, it's very good. And these are tips that you will find useful as you present to larger audiences, where you cannot always assess what kind of questions might come and be prepared for it. Then, of course, you will have the conclusions and closing remarks. Never prepare a presentation without conclusions and closing remarks. These are very important. Although a thank you slide looks like ridiculous, but without questions please or thank you slide, it never really closes. And it also kind of brings the audience to a close, so your presentation or your talk is over and then they can switch over to the next talk. So these are things that you require for the audience orientation as well. So, like I said, there are different kinds of presentation. So depending upon the kind of presentation, you will have to figure out. So these 5 W's that I talked about will also will determine what kind of presentation you would actually go. So you have to decide whether your time is variable and your content. So if you look at these 2 different kinds, we've just given one which is a fellowship interview versus a departmental talk or a conference or thesis defense. You'll have to organize a 5-minute talk for an interview in something very similar of the outline that we're giving you, which is to give yourself an introduction. And these are usually guidelines that a funding agency will also kind of give you if you have these kind. But this is the main constraint between, or main difference between the two would be the amount of time that you have. So you have the same amount of content probably on both of them. However, the amount of time you have to present this would be very different. So when you actually try for a fellowship interview kind of a talk, you will have to give more background of yourself as well. Because a fellowship interview would be something that you're presenting yourself. It's not just the idea that you're, or the work that you have done that actually is, that you're presenting, but you're also presenting yourself as an expert in the field. So this introduction of yourself is very important, which wouldn't be that much if you're giving a departmental talk, because when you come to a departmental talk, usually a chair already introduces you. Most of the people know you. So in this case, the introduction slides do not need to cover more of you. However, in a departmental talk, your content of the slide would actually be very important, because you've been invited mainly to present the amount of work that you have covered, right? Whereas in a fellowship talk or an interview, funding interview, how many here have given an interview for a funding? There are some postdocs here. DST interviews or any of them? Or faculty interviews? So in that case, in an interview like that, you will actually have to present very strongly the message, like, I am choosing to do this for this reason. That message has to come out very strongly, because that will actually kind of come in within this introduction of yourself to present yourself as a strong expert or a credible expert in the field, which in this kind of a presentation is not really necessary. So here you can actually focus more on content. And then in a 5-minute talk, an important part of it is to ask the audience to act on your message. I'm very important, this is why you should give me the fellowship. Something of that sort has to come out very clearly, which is not required, of course, in a departmental. Here, the conclusions of the whole work and all is very important. So you will actually have a variable amount of time for these two and a variable structure of the two. While you have about 3 to 5 slides in something of this kind of a talk, you have up to 15, well, if for a 20-minute talk, for a 20-minute talk, 15 slides is already overshooting, that's already over-ambitious. So in this kind of a difference, the way you design and structure the presentation would be very different. So how many of you here have actually given departmental talks? See, technical difficulties. Now I'll have to finish all of this within this time. How many of you here have given departmental talks? And how long is your departmental talk? 10 minutes. How many slides do you prepare for it? For a 10-minute talk, you prepare a 10-minute slide. 10-minute talk, you prepare 10 slides. Do you always finish on time? Yes, everybody's saying no. Do you have enough time that people ask you questions? No. So do you think people don't ask you questions because they're uninterested in your work, or there's no time? Sorry? Sorry? Okay, so you admit also that they don't even understand. So all of this is relevant. Right. So you're saying that somebody from the silk rearing facility does not understand what the traditional medicine people might be doing. So that's one of the reasons why we are harping about the relevance or the requirement that your presentation be, so you know it's a diverse audience, you know that people from different backgrounds are going to come, but even to them presenting your work, even as a departmental seminar, is important within that 10 minutes, because you do not know from there might be a collaboration that will be forged in. And it's already good time to start practicing that. And no matter what you present, tell a story. Why? Because like Sarah said, it's a vehicle. Because we are good at storytelling, we grow up hearing stories. When you tell something in a story, it retains. It stays. And telling a story is not a fiction, it's not a fictional, it's just how you narrate it. And you will see that as we talk about communication more and more, we'll keep stressing that. It's the way you kind of put everything, because a story kind of puts everything in context. You can't have a story where you have 5 sentences which are unconnected, right? Each sentence has to lead into. And that is a practice that is good to bring in. My PhD supervisor used to tell me that you tell them what you want to tell them, then you tell them what you want to tell them, then you tell them again what you wanted to tell them, then you tell them again, and then finally you tell them again what you wanted to tell them. And even during so as you progress through the presentation, you always bring the story back. You'll bring the story back. So here is a slide. Let me see if it makes sense to you. I'm sure many of you have made press slides like this. It's fantastic, not to write all of this. It shows how much I know. So I'll give you another way of making the same slide. So you look at a figure like that, and instead of having all of it is already written, I animate it, and I bring in that the conditions that compromise protein folding in the ear is this unfolded protein response. Okay, you've had, and then you give what translocates to the ear and what gets phosphorylated and why it binds. And then you tell them that the inhibition of this reduces the ER in stress-induced JNK activation. This is not my subject area, so I cannot actually present the content of the slide very well. And then you give them the next point that you want to tell them. So as you are bringing in each point, you explain it to them. And then you present the research questions instead of having all of it in the same. So instead of having one paragraph and just the questions, you actually make 2 slides, animate them, and then you bring in exactly what the question you're going to talk about. Now this is still quite technical. If you can bring it to less technical, depending upon the scenario. Now if it's a thesis defense, you have to keep it technical, right? Some of the don'ts of result and data slides. And some of these are coming from personal anecdotes as well, personal experiences. Looks nice, it looks fine to you, right? Like, it's a nice picture that you have generated after a lot of difficulty. You have generated this bar graph also, and this also, so you need to present all of it. Why should the audience not know how great of a scientist I am? I can make this, I can make the picture, I can make the bar graph, and I can make this. Why should the audience not know? But does it really serve any purpose? To think of it from your own perspective, where you're an audience sitting and somebody presents a data slide like that. This is just, we just have picked up this one. It could be, we could pick up environmental topic and made the slide as well. It's just something that we have as an example. Instead of having a figure and a table and all of this and a lot of text here, and then you have another one, this is a favorite of most PhD students actually. I've run these numerous number of, and that's it. No legend, nothing, 4 hours, this, OHDA. Do you know what OHDA is? Do you know what MW is? How many of you here knows what MW is? That's because you're a basics. Now supposing you actually present this, or make this presentation to a bunch of physicists. So if you're not going to actually talk about this and you're not going to take the effort to actually explain these in and also have some legend, don't put it. Nobody wants to see your gel pictures. The only person who probably wants to see your gel pictures is your supervisor. To pick the right one that actually relates to the hypothesis. Yeah, even you don't want to look at your gel pictures after a while. It just reminds you of all the sleepless nights, right? And then all the mistakes you made while actually dyeing it. Like, damn it. Don't put gel pictures. Unless there's something very, very specific, something like this gel picture. It's already edited to the point that you could write anything onto it. Like, nobody can question that. So even having such gel, on talks, it's pointless. Even on papers, these are very, very controversial. Like things like this are very controversial. Not to have to actually show exactly what you're measuring against and what is what. So never ever. And people who are going to go ahead and give their thesis defense, remember this. If you're not going to take the time to explain a slide, don't. Just to show a bunch of data, don't put it up. Now look at this slide, the way this one is designed. You have a title, which actually talks about what it is, and then you have the actual figure, which is quite a bit blown up, and you actually have the points as well, showing you exactly what you're going to talk about. So if you have such things, it's good to actually have the text that explains what it is. What is this? What is the blue dot? What are these red lines? Trust me, sometimes even the audiovisual person will start finding it interesting to see, because these are things that they might also start relating. And never ever think that that person is not worth the attention or worth looking it's not worth to get that person's attention. Because as scientists, and we talk about engaging with public, it's important that somebody, if you can have that person interested in your talk, just imagine how much interested your colleagues would be in your talk, right? Now we come to the conclusion side, because conclusion is something that we love to do, because we want to have everything on it. How many of us put too many bullet points in the conclusion? Everything is important and everything is a concluding point. Conclusions should in general be short, to the point, and a concluding slide should always have a title that talks about what the concluding point is. It should give a strong message. What is a strong message, and what do I mean by persuading the audience to take action? Usually in a conclusion you would state something in the sense that I've found this, which will go ahead and tackle the big idea, the big question. So when I say that the audience to take action, it doesn't mean that they will get up and start answering the questions or something. But in a way, like this encourages, or this would get the scientists in the field excited about looking up this work, following up your work, or maybe think about other aspects that can lead from this work. So your conclusion slide in a presentation should be memorable, and that should inspire for further work, further talks, further deliberations. So now that we've gone through let's talk about some general do's and don'ts. What are the general do's? It's fine, we'll get our lunches. I'm hungry too, doesn't matter. So what are the general do's? Now that you've gone through some of this, you've also looked at some of the science communication, why we should do it. If you're presenting your science, think about an obscure audience and then tell me some general do's and don'ts. Format of the presentation, proper linkages to the slide, have a good flow, right? Imagine having a conclusions before the results. I mean, you can do that. I actually started my PhD thesis defense presentation with acknowledgements. You could do that. Just needs a little bit of talent. What are the other general do's and don'ts? Okay, these are logical flow, proper formatting, and always use titles, because it kind of gives a context to the audience as to what this slide is about. And also it's a good guideline for you to stick to what you're going to present. If this is going to present the geography of Madhya Pradesh, you will ensure that it only shows the geography of Madhya Pradesh rather than something else altogether. And don't end your presentations abruptly. Like I can just okay, done, end, bye. Audience will be completely flustered. They're like, what? It's very, very harsh to present, to end it. Many times you will actually have to end it abruptly because probably you have 3 more slides, but there is no time. You have a crunch on time, or the power's gone off and it's not going to come back. It could happen like that. If something like that does happen, it's still relevant to continue to talk to the audience saying, yes, I did have 3 more slides, we would have talked about something like that. If you have to end it because the next speaker is up and you have to walk down, at least end it correctly by saying, I would have had, but in absence of time, I'm still around, please let me know, and hopefully I'll be able to present. So never like just, oh, okay, done. That's a really, really bad way of ending a presentation. And take your time. And when I say take your time, practice, it's not just about giving the talk. It's also about spending time with your presentation. And the more you look at the presentation, the more you present, you will find places, things that is not necessary or that might need changing. And practice giving it. Practice it with different kinds of people, different audiences at different times of the day. Because how to handle your audience? Again, it comes down to the point that if you practice well enough, you have internalized the presentation, because it's not just about the subject matter as well, right? It's also being comfortable with the flow. It's also being comfortable about being able to handle errors. Like you would be presenting and you would make a mistake. So how do you transition from that mistake onto a positive note again? And these come from practice. Practice giving talks. Anytime there is an opportunity to give a talk, not just to the department, but someplace else, to give a public talk, or go to a school, give a talk, anything. Practice giving a talk, even with your group. Try presenting papers that are not within your expertise. To be able to talk about something that is not your expertise. How do you talk about that? That will require you to practice. That will require you to be able to be fluent with at least the material on the slides, right? And so that, because it all comes down to be able to handle the audience. Because at the very first and the last reason that you're presenting is the audience. Now, again, we've been harping on the fact about handling the audience, and how do you handle the audience? These are some guidelines that we have. These are things that are generally practiced. Mock presentation. Like I gave you a tip about how to prepare for questions that the audience might likely ask. So if you think yourself as an audience, that you are looking at this presentation, what would your next question might be? Something of that sort. And rehearse, of course. Answer questions briefly. When you are asked a question, if you launch into the entire methods, and it actually it eats into the time. It discourages other people in the audience from asking you questions. And you will eventually lose the thread of what you're trying to say. Because you remember that you're standing here, and you also have been giving a talk, and you don't have your notes with you probably. You will lose track of what you're trying to say as well. So answer briefly, be polite and stay calm. This is a way of showing respect. No matter what, no matter if it's a controversial question, you might not agree with the audience's question, you might not agree with their point of view. Your answer might lead into a debatable issue or topic, but you still have to be polite, and you still have to stay calm, because losing your cool up there on the stage doesn't help at all. And these all come from a lot of practice, a lot of rehearsals, and being able to give your presentation as if it's as if you can do your bench work, or as if you do your pipetting, which anybody can wake you up and like, just pipette 5 ml of this. I'll take care of it. Internalize the presentation to that point. Seems like a pretty long thing. I mean, it's a pretty long yard to jump. But much of these eminent scientists that give talks on it, they have internalized their presentations so well that they can actually give presentations on the fly. It happens, but it happens with a lot of practice. There are some resources that you can actually look up to get better at presentation, not just because whatever we present here is, of course, a snapshot of the amount of information and knowledge that's available in the world. Nobody is saying that we are the absolute experts of these topics. we are also in the process of learning. We also get a lot of our content from these places. So please look up these, and again, Citable by Nature is of course very good. TED is a fantastic resource. I think I have a YouTube presentation for you.
There's some things I hate about PowerPoint, and I figure it's kind of my duty to point them out. So here we go. Here's common PowerPoint mistakes. Number one, people tend to put every word they are going to say on their PowerPoint slides. Although this eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately this makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring. You will lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Please don't do that anymore, please. Number two, most common, many people do not run spell check. Big mistake. Nothing makes you look stupider than spelling errors. If it's got a red line under it, recheck the spelling. And then finally, I hate this, avoid excessive bullet pointing, only bullet key points. Too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters. Hence the bullet point. Bad color schemes, not good. Clashing background and font colors can lead to distraction, confusion, headache, nausea, vomiting, and loss of bladder control. I can't stay on that one too long. Here's something I've noticed. The number of PowerPoint slides you have in your talk, the less useful your talk actually is. Unfortunately, my presentation is right there. I've also noticed this. People love to pack data into their presentations. They shove more and more data thinking it's better, but it's not. The more data you have, the harder it is to read your slide, and the effectiveness plummets. Now you can improve the effectiveness by adding some shading and some 3D effects, and then some second order and third order effects, and then, I know, let's add some labels. That'll help a lot. And that's pretty much every marketing slide I've ever seen right there. Yeah. Then some like VP of marketing standing there going, it's real clear in Q4. What the hell are you talking about? Now, I'm into in animation. People become animators in PowerPoint. You can have things flying all over the place, and that can be good. If you're a visual learner, that will improve the effectiveness of your performance. But if you're easily distracted, more animations, and people have no idea what you're talking about. They're just, wow, that is cool, wow. And there's regions here, by the way. There's the simple but effective region. There's the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless, the ADD only region, the useful but amusing, the stupid but confusing, the dull triangle, the hyper triangle, the sleepy square, the dizzying pentagon, and everything else I just call pointless motion. That slide right there took me an hour and a half to make, right there. PowerPoint can just suck the life out of you. It's amazing. I've also come up with this. It's a kind of a little science I've invented called font analysis. Basically, the font you choose says something about who you are as a person. There's a huge list of fonts, and you choose one, and that says something about you. So be careful the font you choose. For example, if you choose Courier New, it happens to be my favorite, you're probably organized and structured. If you choose Matisse, it means you're artistic. And if you choose Times New Roman, it means you're lazy, apathetic, and unimaginative, and you always use the default. Oh.
Okay, so we will start talking now about conveying your science through posters, and in some ways it's probably a more effective way of conveying science. Let's see what we have for you. There's a lot of personal interaction. As in, although yes, you're right, the attention of the audience is towards the poster, but as the person presenting the poster, you get a lot more time with the audience to interact and talk, and maybe like have the explain to them in a more personal manner rather than give a very formal talk about your data. it kind of starts to train you to give, because you're still presenting it to an audience, but it is a less formal setting. So you can fumble with your sentences still, but it starts to train you to speak on a more formal dais. It does include more engagement, although I won't say that this crowd is, but many places you lose your audience, start to lose it, because I mean, the person is sitting there for a long time, and it's the flow, it's the agenda that's driving. Whereas in case of a poster, you actually have a choice. You could start looking at a poster for some time and actually move over and go over to another poster. So this actually includes a more personal, I mean, it starts from personal interaction to more engagement, because you can spend more time at a poster and less at another one, depending upon your area of interest. And it also can be viewed at your absence. You can't give a talk if you're not standing here. Whereas in a poster, you can actually have the data there. You're still communicating with the public, whereas physically, you can actually be having a beer. Or rice beer. That's a very interesting work. I should talk to you about rice beer. Where did that person go? There he is sitting. I'll talk to you after the talk. So general poster rules, these are again some things that we are presenting. Again, there are resources that you can also look up. There are templates available online from Microsoft and all. It's preferable to have the title in big fonts, and then you can have subheadings and body text not more than too big. And the captions and figure legends should be in a smaller font, so that it'll have a dual effect. One, it'll actually give it a better structuring, and also it'll draw the audience in to come and read up the figure legends, which is very important. The title needs to be very big, because it's supposed to attract the attention from far off.